coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
So what is the Academy offering? And what they're offering is transparently just ever more extreme fantasies in the kind of deluded hope that, like, well, if kind of the normie boilerplate bog standard, milk toast socialism that we kind of offered before, or like, deconstructionism or whatever, kind of these, at this point, pretty tired, like 90s constructs that started to dominate the Academy. If those are not like delivering the high anymore, if those seem to be more or less useless to giving people a grip on what's happening, if those kind of fantasies and illusions are just not powerful enough to withstand disenchantment today, well then, gosh darn it, we'll just create something that, we'll create a kind of dream framework that is even more extreme, that is so intense and so out there that maybe it will be kind of one of the last trees standing after sort of the atom bomb of disenchantment in America goes off.
Welcome once again to the Roundtable, the official publishers and editors podcast of the American mind in the ongoing struggle for power between the Goliath, that is Ryan Williams, president and publisher of the Claremont Institute, and David, myself, the lowly features editor of the American Mind. I have once again wrested control back from Ryan. No, not really. He's traveling. He was, I believe, at NatCon, which we may discuss briefly, but you're once again stuck with me as a host. I'm joined by managing editor Seth Barron and executive editor James Poulos. Founding editor Matthew Peterson is also out after having given what was widely reputed as one of the best speeches, if not the best speech, at NatCon. So we're very proud of him. And of Ryan, we will see them again next week, but it's a good day, fellas. This is the day after, we're recording this the day after election night, Tuesday, yesterday. There was a little red wavelet across the country, most notably in Virginia. Nobody listening to my voice will need reminding that Glenn Youngkin won his race for governor in a real upset victory, including a major sort of hot button focus, national focus on CRT and school board issues. There was explosive reporting, which we mentioned earlier, about Loudoun County coming out of the Daily Wire, and our own Nate Hockman, when he was an intern here, did some work out there too. He's now moved on to National Review. But in addition to Youngkin, the Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Sears, won her race, as well as did Jason Miyares, Attorney General. Really a remarkable set of results for Republicans in Virginia. In addition to a close race in New Jersey, lost by the Republican Ciattarelli, I think is how you say that, to the Democrat Murphy, but nevertheless much closer than in the eyes of the establishment it, quote, should have been. Other results down the line, which we may get into, but the sort of headline takeaway seems to be that CRT and quote unquote culture war issues, which is to say the populist set of concerns that have been raised more and more loudly by, most notably, our friend Christopher Rufo to great effect, really are things that normal people are hugely concerned about. They're not made up. They are not fabrications or psyops of the vast right-wing conspiracy, as MSNBC and its affiliates have been doing their best to convince you. This is a real thing. There are hugely corrupt and entrenched bureaucracies that have dug their fingers into the public school system. Another thing that we've covered rather at length on this podcast, but it still feels good to get vindication from the people. And of course, it feels good to win. Now, there's more to say about all of this, and we're going to get into maybe some of the asterisks that come with this victory and with this flush of delight. But for now, we rejoice in the cope, which is flowing freely on Twitter. All of the immediate rush to blame white women and white supremacy. Suddenly, once again, voters are evil and oppressive simply for voting for. We might note, of course, not that this matters very much to us, but according to the left's terms, right, a black woman, the first black woman, I believe, elected to the lieutenant governorship in Virginia. She seems like an absolute based queen. She's been tweeting, or her team has been tweeting. This is Winsome Sears' team has been tweeting that people keep calling her based, and she doesn't know what that means, or she's never heard it before. But she's very excited that all these kids are in support of her, which just absolutely warms my heart. She does seem to be pretty based. Sounds like a Jamaican immigrant who gave a speech about living the American dream and fighting back against those who wish to divide us. So, lots of notes that we're approving of being sounded in Virginia and from the GOP. Guys, what do you make of this? Is this, am I wrong to be quite so excited and happy? I know there are a lot of caveats that we want to put on this here, but overall, we're stoked, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's a very exciting win. Whether one loves the particular politicians who came to power or not, it certainly seems like it represents a major upswelling of anger at the liberal consensus, this woke consensus that seems to have, taken root across the country in the last 2 years. I see this not just as a refutation of, say, Bidenism, CRT, and, whatever other, and high gas prices, which it certainly is. It's certainly a reaction against that. But in particular, like the way the teachers union became such a focus of ire in Virginia, in Loudoun County, and I think yes, the critical race theory aspect, the left in a way has kind of focused on that as some kind of like demented, demonic red herring on the part of the Republicans, but beyond that, you've got that bizarre case with the transgender rape that was then covered up and denied by the Loudoun County School Board.
And subsequently defended by the New York Times when discovered.
Yes. Right.
Running actual rape apologia,
Right. Well, the girl had asked for it more.
So I heard.
Michelle Goldberg said. But also, just the last year and a half, the teachers drove the shutdown of the schools. Randy Weingarten, the head of the AFT, forced schools to close. And for the last year and a half, we've been listening to teachers, crying in their car while, supposedly teaching class, from the parking lot of TJ Maxx or wherever they are, demanding that they be held, harmless, that their safety was, the most important thing, that not one teacher lose, a night's sleep or a dime of pay. I think it just kind of sickened people. I think people got really angry at, in a sense, this is like a revulsion, I think, against like the administrative state as personified by the teachers union, which has gotten away for so many years with identifying itself with with education, with a capital E, with the kids. Like, if you love kids, you have to give the teachers whatever they want. If you don't love kids, then you hate the teachers. The fact, for instance, like people said, oh, well, why did Terry McAuliffe bring Randy Weingarten out in his last couple of days as and campaign with her? But I think that's the wrong question. He had no choice. This is clearly something she wanted to do. And she's really the senior partner in that relationship. The teachers own the Dems. The Democrats cannot establish daylight between themselves and the teachers. They're the same thing. there's no running away from the teachers union for the Democrats. So, if Randy Weingarten thought that she needed to come out and push the idea that the teachers were really the heroes here, what was McAuliffe supposed to say? They probably gave him most of his funding. So I think that this was a big strike against, obviously not against education or, for white supremacy or, but just against this idea that this is who owns your children and this is who owns politics and the nation. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I think that this was salutary.
Yeah, certainly no complaints here. I mean, I think what's especially interesting to me anyway, but hopefully to everyone in the world, is, definitely CRT was a huge factor in this race. That is not just anecdata, that is actual data. Chris Rufo himself tweeted out 16 hours ago, as of this recording, according to twitter.com, the headline that critical race theory was the top factor for 25% of Virginia voters, while 72% called it important. That's a Fox analysis, an important factor in their vote. So there's no doubt that CRT played a significant role in this race. And I think will continue to play a significant role as we see that CRT and all of these sort of related elements of woke indoctrination have really fanned out aggressively throughout the country at every level of institutional life. And we're beginning to see, ordinary Americans who, have no reason to try to understand these recondite doctrines as they become ever more esoteric and obscure, and are, I think, frankly, a lot of these people are just shocked to discover that this is going on. It's so far beyond the pale, and now they have an opportunity to organize and react, and we're seeing that reaction. But a part of that is something which does not have to do with racial doctrine, but sort of the larger effort to refound America that we are seeing unfold. And that's, there's, I guess, maybe I can get away with calling this a second CRT, which is cyborg rapture theory. And we're seeing this play out. It was October.
Are we present at the coinage of this?
We are present at the coinage. Yes, right. You heard it here first. Early October, maybe even a little before that, the Virginia gubernatorial debate where McAuliffe really stepped in it on saying, that the parents should not have a role in directing the education of their children. And of course, that Kinsley gaffe, I think, is what it's called when you accidentally say what you mean. That was a result of this question about whether the candidates supported the Virginia Department of Education, I believe, issuing guidelines that quote unquote trans students should be able to use the bathroom and locker room of their choice across school districts in Virginia. Hot on the heels of that episode, Seth, as you mentioned, was the rape episode. And from one perspective, it's like, well, these out of touch Dems are busy trying to convince people that they need to, celebrate trans identities, while, Rome burns, while runaway inflation is happening, while the supply chain is collapsing, while the fundamentals of our financial system are being thrown increasingly into doubt. All manner of what should be kind of like, if not layups or low hanging fruit, then like must do's for a party in power. You kind of like have to take care of these kinds of things if you want to have a reasonable expectation of not getting wiped out in the very next election. And there is that sort of fiddling while Rome burns sense to it. But, I think Americans are catching on that, this isn't really fiddling, that this, quote unquote trans stuff is essential, is foundational to their vision of the regime that needs to be built to replace the one that we have right now. And, that's one in which trans identity shoots up to the top of the woke prestige stack, because it is the first big step into a transhuman way of life. where you use technology. If you can use technology to, to officially overcome your biological sex, then the obvious question is, well, what can you do next? And there is nothing in the ethical framework that we're being presented with as the operating system for the regime of the impending future that would say, well, no, if a kid wants to identify as a cat, that should not be celebrated and officially recognized. If the kid wants to, surgically implant, male and female genitalia, like, no, that's not something that should be put right at the very core of school curricula as a model of the highest and best, most virtuous and, perhaps even most sacred in a certain demented sense thing that, that a kid can do, a real, heroic act of progressive leadership. It's foundational to the culture, and if you want to get philosophical about it, to the political theology that is being constructed for this social credit system that we're being herded into. And so it's more and different from just indulging in some sort of goofy, wacky beliefs that, just marginal people or like academics who've crawled up their own navel. It's not that. It's something that's much more foundational, much more indicative of the direction that people like Terry McAuliffe think the United States must be forcibly moved in, regardless of what parents think, regardless of what citizens think. I expect that as CRT continues to receive its due at the polls, the shadow CRT of cyborg rapture theory will too. We are not all going to be disappeared into a metaverse where people can adopt any combination of identities that they want, and that's going to like solve our problems. We can't eliminate our humanity and expect that to solve our problems in reality or in a sort of federally mandated metaverse. Increasingly, that's the ideology that the left is being rallied around.
Okay, so first of all, if people want to understand these threats more deeply and how they can remain human forever in the face of them, they should go to humanforever.us, where they can be the first to know when NFTs drop for your new book, James. Then I have a question, which is kind of, I think, in response to both of your comments on this. And that is, our best friend, our beloved Bill Kristol, formerly of the Weekly Standard, now of hysterical Never Trumpism, has kind of, become a Democrat, has plunked for the ruling class over the American people. And his latest tweet about this, or one of his latest tweets about it was, I've been looking at the data and thinking about this Virginia thing and, pulling my head up from the high weeds to look at the forest instead of the trees, like, I have some concerns. This looks pretty bad for us. Meanwhile, as I mentioned at the top, right, the left Democrats, the cathedral, whatever you want to call them, are just like absolutely doubling down, at least in the immediate aftermath. I called it cope, but it's really like, it's extra hard. It's like, do more accusations of racism, do more, insistent calls to take children out of the hands of their parents, which leads me to my question, which is like, will the left pivot after this, and can they pivot? Can any of them pivot? Because to put my cards on the table, it seems to me like they really almost can't. James, first of all, for the reason that you're indicating, which is that the things they are advocating are actually not like about this or that particular kooky issue so much as about a theological commitment to an evolving vision of the world as dissolved into this sort of digital sludge where we can transcend every boundary of nature. And they believe in that, like, not as a matter actually of political expediency so much as a bet on the future of the entire cosmos, out of which it's much harder to back out of that. And then perhaps on a more, prosaic level, I'm not so sure that they understand like any strategy besides the one that's been working pretty well for them, which is like this sort of theology of shame, right? This, they're not actually trying to win people over. They're trying to guilt people into feeling like they have to hand over some part of their sovereignty, their money, their lives, their time, in the name of the absolution that they're supposed to get from these new gods. So, I mean, from my perspective, like there's no such thing as pivoting from here on out. There's just like, the race between kind of human forever and the metaverse cyborg vibarium, which I can't pronounce. But maybe I'm off. I mean, do you guys think that the Dems have any greater chance of like kind of seeing sense?
I don't. Here's why. All right, under Trump, they just went full steam, put all of their chips on, Trump is the tyrant. Trump represents evil. We have to get rid of Trump. So they managed to do that. But the only positive agenda they have is, trans rights, radical racial restructuring, and, the most perverse type of environmentalism, which is essentially, let's destroy the economy and remake it. This, build back better. Where can they go? And none of this pertains to the real world. It reminds me of like, I don't know, like Marx talking about like these idealists who believe that like revolutions in pure thought have like significant, will turn the world upside down just by like, wishing it. Everything that they think has nothing to do with anything that actually improves people's lives. So yes, there's runaway inflation. There's, boats sitting in the Long Beach harbor. There's all these actual problems, people dying of overdoses. You can't just wave your equity wand and make these things go away. But that's completely where they've placed themselves. What's funny with all of this, you hear all of these people on the news, MSNBC, railing about the CRT question and saying this is a fake thing. It doesn't exist. Nobody is teaching CRT in schools. This is their like Mott and Bailey like approach. Like, well, nobody is actually teaching critical race theory in schools. But that's not really the question. The question is, well, do you think they should teach it in schools? If not, why not? Like they all like critical race theory, whether like, the most arcane aspects of critical race theory are being taught to kindergarten kids or not, is beside the point. Point is that they would be happy to have it taught. They think it should be taught. And that's their entire perspective, is that everything should be filtered and diced according to, this new intersectional ideology. And if it isn't yet, well, then it ought to be. So, they can run and hide from it as much as they want. But I think people pretty much are, have tumbled to what the reality is. So I don't know where they go from here. I mean, what are they going to do? They're not going to all of a sudden say, yes, we need to build a wall on the border. They've already said that everyone has the right to come here. They've already sold the shop. So I don't know where they go.
You're reminding me, Seth, just briefly of when Dostoevsky was sent into exile, I guess in Siberia. He, had in his youth been sort of enthusiastic about these Marxist Soviet ideas and then, or rather socialist ideas, and then discovered that like none of the peasantry were revolutionaries, like they were all Christians, and the working class did not actually share the grand designs of the literary elite. Anyway, James.
Yeah, I mean, I find that all to be very plausible from Seth. There are some pressures, though. Last night I was up at the Zephyr Institute giving a talk on ye old cyborg vivarium and alternatives there too. And, one of the questions that I got in the Q&A was basically like, can liberalism survive this challenge? Do liberals have to basically renounce their liberalism in order to escape the cyborg vivarium? And my response was basically like, if liberalism can become more parochial and less universal, or universalist, then it may have a sort of second lease on life. Trying to force everyone into the same digital system is, even if it's being done under liberal pretenses, is profoundly illiberal. And there are Democrats who sense this and who, at the end of the day, do not want to refound America in the way that their ideological vanguard wants America to be refounded. Does Bill Kristol want to live in the metaverse? Like, probably not. Maybe, but probably not. And I think this sort of titter of worry that is beginning to ripple through certain parts of the left. You look at the performance of what's his name, John Lujan, in South Texas, getting the win, in a heavily Hispanic district there. There are ordinary Americans out there who are Democrats and who are beginning to question things. And if they want to swim in a different direction than their party is taking them, they might be able to do it, but it might require having to break with the party. There are, sort of weird third parties have always been this kind of perennial feature of American politics. And they have done, serious damage to one of the major parties at different points in history, whether it was, the Bull Moose or the late lamented Ross Perot Reform Party effort that basically got Bill Clinton elected. And it could well be that we are facing a situation where it's the left that suffers that kind of fate coming up. I mean, I think, as you suggested, Spencer, the cornerstone in a lot of ways of the messaging out of the Democrats was, unless you viscerally hate Donald J. Trump, you are a quote unquote Trumpist. And, even if they struggled to define exactly what Trumpism was, by God, if you did not renounce the devil and all of his works, then you were a Trumpist. And in reality, as we know, and as many know, in reality, the relationship between Trump and his voters was far more complex. And the relationship between Trump and even extremely based and red-pilled people today remains complex. There are nuances there that the left does not recognize, that they don't want to recognize, they don't want to be true. And so in the spirit of magnanimity, I will suggest that there are probably nuances on the left too, which are not really getting the attention that they deserve, in part because it will reveal, the weakness of the movement that is being forced upon America, not just on rest of deplorables, but on everyone, on, sort of Democrat families somewhere, in purple country who just want to grill and have their kids get good grades and, live normal lives. So as things unfold, I think that the right will continue to have a sort of a fruitful recalibration, and it's an open question whether the folks on the opposite side are going to be able to recalibrate, or whether they're just going to be dragged to hell by a quote unquote elite class that I think the mask is coming off and people are starting to see them for who they are and what they want.
So, okay, this dovetails nicely into my next question, actually, because we've discussed a little bit what this result might or might not be able to mean for the left or the cathedral. I'd like to talk a little bit about what it does mean for the right, or for us, or the good guys, or whatever you want to call this kind of like, you're describing it well, James, this the normal people coalition, right? The folks that react instinctively with a certain kind of revulsion and horror at the idea that our humanity is somehow our enemy, that we need to stamp it out of ourselves and give our children over to the experts who are good at stamping humanity out of them, right? One thing we've definitely seen in Virginia, especially, and elsewhere this week, is that it's a powerful emotional driver for people, as it should be, when you present to them the reality of what is going on, at least in its plain political terms. I don't know that a lot of voters are sitting at home like concerned about the the real CRT, the cyborg, what was it? Cyborg resurrection, not resurrection, rapture, the cyborg rapture
yes.
theology. You know, that moment will certainly come as these technologies become more and more real. But like in any case, the effects of it are already seen and known. They're emotionally visceral and powerful for voters, as they should be. There's enormous potential for a true American uprising. And like leaving the Trump of it even aside for a moment, right? Just taking Trump as somebody who first instinctively recognized some of these realities and mobilized a movement. But, you know, I think we can all at least agree that that movement is bigger than Trump and will outlast him. There's a real question on the table, I think, for the establishment GOP or the formal GOP, you know, whether this victory in Virginia represents them grasping these truths, right? Represents them coming at least dimly to understand that electoral success for them and indeed success for the country lies down this road of, you know, normal people facing up to real problems of the digital age. Do you guys think that there's hope for, you know, a real understanding of that to grow in the institutional right, or do you think that they will kind of skim a couple new cultural war issues off the top of this, and then, you know, just relax back into? I mean, the House Republicans tweeted something like, you know, this shows that Americans don't like socialism, which would strike me as like an example of a bad lesson to take away from all of this. And certainly there's at least a danger that like we will just take kind of dumb and unhelpful lessons out of this at a political level. What do you guys think?
Well, I do think that if history is any measure, then yes, the Republican leadership will just kind of congratulate themselves for their brilliance in exploiting in letting the Democrats stumble over themselves, and then they'll just go back to, you know, saying, yes, we need to cut capital gains taxes, we need to make things, you know, all the usual stuff. I think that would be, you know, a sad error, but one we've seen before. You know, it would be great if, you know, new voices in the Republican establishment, like, you know, grokked the deeper currents of alienation going on in the country, seized the populist moment, and, you know, made itself really the normal people's party, the party of Americans for Americans. You know, some of the, you know, the more wholesome aspects of Trump and Trumpism, without maybe some of the, you know, guff. That would be great. You know, I just don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, I'm really struck again. I really like what James is saying about the kind of anti-nature view. And, you know, when it comes to energy policy, it's sort of similar to their attitude about like humanness. Like here we have this biology, these lumps of meat walking around, and why can't we just turn them all into something else? Either through, you know, technology, medicine, who knows? Let's just play. Well, they kind of have a similar attitude about how energy works. I mean, they seem to think that oil and the entire industrial revolution is something that was foisted on us by these filthy polluters who had the choice to do it in a clean way back in the 1850s, but decided not to. And hence, like the quantum leaps of, you know, advance that have come since then have all been at the expense of the earth. And it could have been done a different way, and they chose not to, and we're going to rectify that. And we're going to come up with a way where energy is clean, portable, that you could just, you know, sort of snap your fingers and have as much clean energy as you want. Not recognizing that, you know, solar panels, you can only get so much energy out of particles of light, that wind turbines, the fact that they don't produce electricity energy when the wind isn't blowing, that's actually a problem. That batteries need to be massive in order to contain the same amount of energy that a barrel of oil has. This total denial of physical reality. And I guess where I'm getting to is that's part of the whole normal people project, is to just get back to some certain brass tacks about how the world works, just in the most basic sense, that people are people. They have that the sexes, that there's dimorphism among mammals, that how that burning things produces energy, et cetera, et cetera. So something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, there's the room for an agenda like that is there. The opportunity is wide open. The line between utopianism and dystopianism coming out of the left is really blurry right now. It's hard for people to tell. For example, whether the environmental policy that controls the left right now is a hopeful one or a doom-stricken one. And I think that runs through kind of the whole approach to technology and to digital that is being offered from that side. Is it really supposed to be taken as good news that we're just the place where we can really find happiness is as just floating torsos in somebody's simulation? That doesn't seem very exciting to ordinary people and to people who haven't had their memories basically erased by a combination of COVID depression and SSRIs and just a vague generalized hatred for everything that that's older than 5 years. There's a big opportunity for Republicans and for anyone who wants to get involved in citizen politics to offer a positive and an exciting vision of how ordinary people can use powerful digital technologies for to strengthen our relationships with one another, to strengthen our relationships with nature, to strengthen our relationships with our own children, future generations, in reality, in the real world. We don't have to climb into Mark Zuckerberg's imagination in order to have an exciting experience with technology. We don't need to fly to Mars in order to have an exciting experience with technology. We can create and use ways to get ordinary people sort of up to speed. It takes an afternoon really to learn what you need to learn in order to put together a plan where your communities, your neighborhoods can take control of databases and can use Bitcoin to buy and sell stuff that's meaningful and valuable and memorable. There are ways of doing this. It just requires a little bit of learning and some seriousness of recognizing what the stakes are. Luddism. What does Luddism even mean in a digital age? It's not like you can just throw your wooden shoe into the cogs of the factory and you can't burn the stuff down. You can't just march into the field with your muskets. It's a paradigm shift. That's kind of an overused phrase, but this is an example of what that means. And we're in an age when it's not going to be warfare like it used to be. It's not going to be in some ways politics like it used to be. But we have to have politics if we want to remain human beings, and we should flex that muscle before it atrophies. If the Republican Party or someone in the GOP, I know we got some based tech guys coming in, making a stir, and that's all to the good. And if they can actually lead a political agenda that whether you want to call it a Second Amendment for compute or something else, that guarantees that Americans can participate in computation, in programming, telling machines what to do. People should be able to buy high-powered GPUs. They should be able to use those GPUs to do stuff that strengthens their humanity and that gives them a firm foundation for participating in real life, in the real world, and real human flourishing, even at a time when everything's flooded with little robots, visible and invisible.
Yeah, sorry, Seth, go ahead.
Oh, I just, I remember all this talk about the I saw the metaverse video the other day. I mean, it's just like, what the hell is this? But it just seemed, okay, the TV show The Office, like, okay, they had this thing once where the Dwight character was playing Second Life. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That whatever that thing was, Second Life, some kind of with avatars in in a simulated world. And he's telling the Jim character, he's like, this is really great, Second Life. It's like a game, but there's no winners or losers. And then Jim kind of does this aside. He's like, oh, it has losers, all right.
Yeah.
Which, just struck me as like really funny. I don't really see what the difference between the metaverse and Second Life is.
No, there's no, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like we look at this, or I at least, see that Zuckerberg video come out, and it's everywhere because they know how to make it everywhere. It's for like a day straight. It's just in your feed, that clip of him, like uploading into this spaceship where his friends are all avatars, right? Like, I don't know. It's kind of easy to feel like this is this insurmountable, all-encompassing, all-powerful challenge that there's simply no way to fight back against. Like, people are just going to like instantly submit and acquiesce and become like the fat blobs in Wall-E who just live with their faces glued to a screen. And I guess like James indicated some of the reasons why you might think that would be the case, but also at the same time, right? If you think about whatever fictional representations of this kind of thing. I mean, the metaverse itself comes from Snow Crash, this sort of dystopian sci-fi novel. And like, they're all dystopian. The Matrix, Ready Player One, James pointed out Vivarium to me on Twitter, Wall-E, right? Like this, Plato's Cave, like every artistic vision that we have of this kind of activity of like total submersion into VR is like viscerally hideous to us. So there's obviously something that we really don't like at a primal level about this idea and about all expressions of it, whether they be, profound, philosophical and sci-fi futuristic, or simply, offshoots in the form of like some political program in Loudoun County somewhere, there's something just like deeply unappealing about this, which has to do with the fact that like, nature, if you chase her out, what was this, Horace, I guess, if you chase nature out with a broom, she comes in the back door. And like, so there's this, I think, just enormous kind of almost atavistic in a really good way energy to be tapped in there from any politician that wants to mount a like party of nature movement. And I will say that, the GOP is like, ever doing its best to outdo our every expectations for its stupidity. So I don't want to, be a Pollyanna and get excited about their potential. But like, I mentioned at the top this tweet from the Winsome Sears team about like, people are calling me based, and I don't know what that is, but I just love that the kids and now, she's tweeting out like, the Drake meme where it's like no to critical race theory, yes to critical based theory. Like to me, there's something enormously touching and hopeful about that, of like, wow, imagine a human politician like hearing from her human constituents in a new medium and like, understanding something about, what they're expressing with all of their like, folkloric ways of talking, with all their slang and whatever. Like, this is obviously tapping into something. She's coming to understand. She's listening. Like, like James says, like, there's no law written into the universe that this is how we have to use the technology that we have. There's no law that like the value proposition for virtual reality technology should be like enter into a universe in which Mark Zuckerberg, pencil-necked sociopath, becomes your god. Like, that's not written in the stars. We could use this technology any number of ways, and it just depends on like whether somebody is willing to tap into our innate desire to like be human beings.
Yeah, I mean, I would just want to add that like Zuckerberg has obviously taken a lot of criticism, and some of it justified, but I think that the speed and kind of naivety with which he has pivoted into the metaverse reflects that like social media itself is a good example of how, various forms of technology that we use are not written in the stars. Social media is like a pretty unstable form of technology that kind of combines TV and digital together in a way that, doesn't seem to satisfy anyone at all. And I think one of the reasons why it's been so dissatisfying and yet engrossing for so many people is because it is this kind of like unstable hybrid. The effort to move into the metaverse is, I think, an effort taking place at a pretty high level in American society to try to stabilize the digital architecture of our online lives. It could potentially be quite stable and quite stagnant and quite deadening and quite bad for human beings, bad for the soul. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, there are ways of creating sort of cool and different and involved forms of telecommunication that aren't going to sort of destroy our humanity, and the way to get there is by making sure that we actually, take some humble, salutary pride in the gift of our humanity, and accept the responsibility of taking care of ourselves as human beings. Sort of the ultimate form of self-care, you might say. And if we manage to do that, then we can start to restore a little bit of the trust or the confidence that we have in our ability to create tools that are going to work well for us rather than undermine us. I think that's a path that we can start taking it at any time. We can start taking it right now. And some people are on that path. And I think, the more that people look around and notice that, you can do this without, getting canceled, without becoming an enemy of this regime or that, the more they'll want to participate. And at a certain point that reaches a critical mass, and then, then things can get fun again. And I think that's something people are hungry for.
Well, it would be great if Matt or Ryan were here to update us on NatCon, the National Conservatism Conference. Obviously, they can't be because they're there, but to me, it looked like a total bop. It seemed like a banger. I was kind of watching updates from it on Twitter, and maybe we'll get more from them on this next week. But I was wondering if anything stood out to you guys. I mean, I saw our friend Josh Hammer had a great speech. Obviously, Matt gave one, and JD Vance gave one quoting Nixon, I think, about the professors are the enemies. A lot of energy. Whatever we may think about the Youngkin victory as a representative of developments in the GOP, or just a kind of nascent indicator that things could go one way or another. Certainly, that conference looked to me like a pretty rousing defense of this like new populist vision against kind of outdated fusionism. Anything stand out for you guys in the press releases from that?
Well, I guess I could say a little something about, many fifis are being hurt by the claim that the professors are the enemy. Someone, I admit I didn't bother to see exactly who it was, did one of those handshake meme tweets where it was like JD Vance and Pol Pot, both saying the professors are the enemy. And it's like, who do you think, like, all of these professors are taking their intellectual and philosophical cues from? Like, maybe not Pol Pot, but like certainly Mao, and among others, like their vision of the good, and they have one, and they're not afraid to use it. They have a vision of the common good. It just involves like crushing certain groups of Americans, maybe not, literally killing them and stacking their skulls. I don't think anyone's advocating for that. But destroying their way of life, destroying their culture, destroying their civilization, eradicating official public memory of, the people and the sort of the events of their history. I mean, you don't have to throw around the word genocide in order to describe, what the hive mind of the Left Academy wants to do. But at a certain point, it's inevitable that these sort of memes will go out. and two can play at that game. So I think this is another one of those kinds of situations where the apparently fatuous aspect of the cultural politics coming out of the left, seems like how can they care about this stupid stuff when everything's falling apart? This is going on in the academy too. The value of a college degree is falling apart. The value of a college education is falling apart. People know that when they send their kid to school, when they send their kid to college, that kid is just as likely as not, and perhaps more so, to come out being unable to find their way in this sort of digital world that is being frantically spun up around us all. And so what is the academy offering? And what they're offering is transparently just ever more extreme fantasies, in the kind of deluded hope that if kind of the normie boilerplate bog standard, milk toast socialism that we kind of offered before, or deconstructionism or whatever, kind of these, at this point, pretty tired, 90s constructs that started to dominate the academy. If those are not delivering the high anymore, if those seem to be more or less useless to giving people a grip on what's happening, if those kind of fantasies and illusions are just not powerful enough to withstand disenchantment today, well then, gosh darn it, we'll just create something that, we'll create a kind of dream framework that is even more extreme, that is so intense and so out there that maybe it will be kind of one of the last trees standing after sort of the atom bomb of disenchantment in America goes off. And that's getting to be a very difficult sell. And the academy is very much in the marketplace. It is a product. It does have to sell itself. And I think the days of, the federal government just sort of, paying the academy to indoctrinate people in an ever more extreme way are over. We read that story. We saw how it goes with student loans. I'm not sure that student loan repayment is ever going to come back in the way that it was before COVID. And I think a lot of Americans, even sort of the craziest lefties, are aware that the way that it was a failure. The system that was constructed simply didn't work. And unlike those sort of fringe folks who are now not at the fringe, are right at the center. I think most Americans at this point are seriously, asking the question of what is it that what has the academy done for me lately? What do all these professors actually want? Are they giving me any value for value, even a value proposition? And if they're not, and if they're basically functioning to just suck money and kids out of America and spit out messed up kids and keeping the change, then yes, that is hostility to the American way of life. That is hostile. I mean, we can see how hostile it is even just to our form of government. The kids that college is spitting out are people who are the Atlantic might talk a good game about our democracy, but communism is probably preferable. They don't want to participate in citizenship. They don't want to, whether it's local government or even just, at a higher level, they want to punch the ballot card once every 4 years or whatever, and just have, a woke God emperor for the rest of their lives, attending to their needs and making them feel safe. So yeah, the academy has become hostile to the interests and the convictions of ordinary Americans. And if the academy does not find a way to correct for that, they're going to be routed around or plowed under in some way.
Yeah, it's funny. I second everything you said, and it's interesting to think about the way in which the academy and then the public education establishment is embodied by Randy Weingarten and the UFT and the Democratic Party. They kind of don't really like the idea. I mean, they have something that they're selling. And the fact that its sell by date was 20 years ago and it's moldy and rotting doesn't really bother them because they figure they have a monopsony and everybody has to take what they're buying anyway. I was thinking, like when I was in college, you would always hear this thing that people would say, like deans or professors, like the reason you're here is to learn how to think. Like we will teach you critical thinking skills. You will learn how to think. But like, and that's the sort of thing. Oh wow, that's great. I'm going to learn how to think. It's like, what do you think? People who don't go to college don't know how to think? I mean, it's like such an absurdly inflated sense of like what it is they're doing. I mean, it's just like purely in the world of spirit. Like there's nothing. We don't have to teach you how to do anything. We're just telling And then, especially talk to anybody who just graduated from college. Do you really think do they sound like they know how to think? I mean, not really, and it's not that it's their fault. They just have no experience in the world, and they've kind of been puffed up with this sense of self-importance a little bit, and I don't know. And then you think about what it is that the public schools. Obviously, there's probably good public school teachers out there. I don't want to denigrate everybody who's doing that. I mean, God, it's probably like a tough job on a certain level. But what it is that they claim that they're doing, essentially, molding like little wokesters. I don't know. It's just, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. The whole system, both the public and K through 12, and then post post-secondary education. It's clearly a disaster, and it's clearly not working.
Oh, Seth, you're a funny guy. That's very funny. No, I mean, look. Some of my best friends are professors, and that's actually true. I've said this before on the show. Like I'm a creature of the academy. On some level, I'm biting the hand that fed me, and on some level, I'm criticizing more in sorrow than in anger. And many of my friends who are professors reacted very viscerally to that line, "Professors are the enemy," by pointing out that hashtag not all professors, or that they are professors who are doing a good job, and all of those things can be perfectly true without J.D. Vance's point being fundamentally unsound. You guys have both, I think, pointed out ways in which there are many good people who still go into these institutions in order to fight the good fight, in order with some hope, right, of keeping the flame alive, right? Which only makes it all the more tragic that the institutions themselves have become captured by fundamentally corrupt bureaucrats who have no interest in the life of the mind, no interest in the true good and the beautiful. And as James, you point out, are thoroughly devoted to a vision of the world in which, what does the world exist to do? It exists to churn up kids, psychologically mangle them and spit them out so that the system can continue apace and can be installed at some profound utopian level. There's a reason that I kind of want nothing to do with that set of institutions. And as we've discussed before on this show, when we were talking about APSA, that's not the same thing as the life of the mind. That's an extremely time-bound and hugely contingent set of institutions that evolved in Europe and America. And for a time, the university was the great center of the kind of Socratic pursuit as it was baptized into the Judeo-Christian tradition. And all those things are very beautiful, and it would be great to preserve as much of what was good in them as possible. But the world is fundamentally changing, and many elite institutions have basically plunked for the wrong side of that change. They've plunked, instead of plunking for go on YouTube and empower yourself to, learn useful skills in the digital age, or rediscover the great thinkers who have articulated not just how to think, but what it is to be human and how you might, maximize and all of that. Instead of plunking for any of that, many of these institutions have simply plunked for you will be assimilated. And on that level, J.D. Vance is exactly right, unfortunately. That's about all we have time for. It's been a pleasure as always. Glad to be here with you guys on this auspicious day. Thank you for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. We always appreciate and really, survive off of the generosity of our supporters. If you want to learn more about all our projects and writing, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our brand new Washington, D.C. based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Many people are saying that center is based, and we're not sure what that means exactly, but we're very honored that the kids are calling us based. In addition, if you wish to survive the coming digital cataclysm and retain your humanity in the face of the ascendant cyborg vivarium, then you should go to humanforever.us and sign up to become the first to know when NFTs for James's new book go live. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And thank you all for listening. This was a fun one. Talk to you next week.